I always love listening to Scandinavian anglers, Dara. I don't know about you. I always learn so much more from them than the British.
They just sound like really accomplished anglers when they talk.
Don't they? They just sound better than us. Their knots are better. Their casting is better. Their flies are better.
They can just talk about 30, 40 pound fish as if it's, down the end of your back garden.
How dare they?
It's the Vikings, the Vikings for you.
It's the Vikings, yeah. It's the Viking mentality. No, it was really interesting to talk to Michael about fishing and his work as an activist. Now, our next guest, Dara, he ticks all the boxes and some. They need to create new boxes for this guy. Yes, he's a successful writer, entrepreneur, environmentalist, conservationist, reluctant businessman. Yes, he's one of Time magazine's most influential people of 2023. Yes, he was the founder of Patagonia. But what else? There's so much more to Yvon Chouinard than that, right?
The great thing about this episode and this interview with Yvon is it's not just about business. It's not just about fishing. It's not just about climbing. Dare I say it, it's life lessons, Jim.
Yeah.
It's about a mentality. It's about a mindset, how to approach life. Yvon is in his 80s now, I believe. And the next day after speaking to us, he was flying out to New Zealand to go fishing, I think, for about 6 weeks.
Of course he was. And so who wouldn't if they were Yvon Chouinard? That's what I'd be doing. I'd be chasing fish all over the world. I'd be chasing silver.
But in the meantime, after a life's work, he gave Patagonia away. He said all the profits, it's given back to saving the planet.
Yeah.
So, we spoke about Mikael last week, walking the walk, talking the talk. Yvon is that times a couple of billion in terms of what he can do for the planet. I love it when you walk into a Patagonia store and it says our business is saving the planet.
It is synonymous with conservation and altruism, and it isn't mock humility. It isn't greenwashing. It is the real deal. And it is an incredible legacy business for Yvon. And also it's an incredible standard bearer for any other aspiring business that wants to do its bit for the world.
Yeah, and there's so much we can learn from Yvon and what he brought to the table and what he wanted to do with Patagonia and how he achieved it. So as I said, it's not just about business. It's not just about the nature. It's not just about conservation, not even just about fly fishing. But obviously we spoke to Yvon about that and found out about the role fly fishing played in his life.
I'm a serial sportsman in that I like to do a sport up to about 70 or 80% proficiency. And then I get bored and then I go on to something else. So I've been lucky to be in the golden age of spearfishing in the 50s when we had to make all our own gear. No wetsuits or anything like that. We wore wool and 55-degree water.
I love that quote from your book. Over specialization is overrated. The last 25% is not worth the effort. I think that's beautiful. And it lets me off the hook on so many things. And to hear that also applies to you makes me sleep easier at night.
Well, it's fine to be a serious runner, but if you want to be really, really top of the game, you have to devote your entire life to it. And you end up being a pretty boring person unless you want to talk about their body or their last race. There's not much to talk about. I just like to go off on a whole other tangent rather than work on that last part.
And just to apply that to fishing, I'm sure you've come across many anglers that take themselves maybe quite seriously. And I often think that once you get to a certain level of proficiency, and it's not necessarily a level that is particularly qualified or strong, then you're good enough to catch the fish if the fish is going to be there and wanting to be caught.
Well, I have achieved the highest proficiency of any of my sports that I tried, probably in ice climbing. And at the same time, I was developing all the tools for ice climbing. I had to develop the techniques as well and wrote the first book about ice climbing. So I have kind of pushed it all the way. And now I would say I'm pushing it with fishing.
But you'll never get to 100% with fishing. You know that, Yvon.
That's the beauty of it. Every time I go fishing, I learn something. And I've written, a couple books. And now I'm working on another one. called pheasant tail, which is 17 flies that you can tie with pheasant tail bodies, and in a way to simplify your fishing, and that's for Atlantic salmon, steelhead, trout, bonefish. They all work as well as any other fly, and it's a book on simplicity, and of course, it's if my mother was still alive, she would buy the book. My wife won't.
Yvon, can I ask you? I'm fascinated by that 80% principle. When you look at business success, right? If people would think of the success of Patagonia and the success you've had, that you have to be this obsessive type. And I think of American business culture, which is, you have to live and die for the job. You have to be working 100-hour weeks. And what's really refreshing is hearing you say, no, you have 80%. Is that enough? And did that same principle apply for Patagonia? And if so, how are you able to make it such a success?
Well, I've worked hard. The title of my book, Let My People Go Surfing, makes it sound like, well, when the surf's up, you just drop your job and go surfing, and it's la la land. But we work very hard, and my wife and I have gone through some agonizing times in business, and it's ironic because I never wanted to be a businessman. And so when I decided, I was a craftsman. I was making, tools for mountain climbers, and then finally some clothing for the outdoors. And
you never saw yourself as a businessman. Sure you didn't.
When I finally decided that I was a businessman, and I was pretty much stuck into doing that the rest of my life, I decided to do it my own way. And most of the people working for me were all climbers and skiers and kayakers and outdoor people, and none of them had any business degrees. And why were we in business? Well, we enjoyed making the tools that we were going to use and the clothing that we wanted to wear. And we felt good about that, but we didn't feel good about the normal way of doing business. And so we just decided to do it our own way. And so we broke a lot of the rules of business. And in fact, I've given talks at universities, commencement addresses and stuff. And I tell the kids, look, life is a lot easier by breaking the rules than trying to conform to them. It's a lot easier. You can invent your own games and you can always be a winner. But if you have to play someone else's game, they're gonna win.
I can imagine there's a lot of teachers, shifting from foot to foot uncomfortably when you give those talks to their students.
They don't like that at all. In fact, I received an award from the American Advertising Council one time, which is a big deal. And I went back to New York, and I would never do that these days, but I went back to New York to get the award, and I admitted to him that, look, we don't do any advertising. we spend less than 0.5% on advertising. And this is quite a few years ago. And I said, advertising is dead. And social media is going to take over. And in fact, we do a lot of marketing, but our marketing is very simple. We just tell people who we are. We don't have to invent the Marlboro Man, because our customers want authenticity.
It's like that. I love that the Patagonia ad, the one that don't buy this jacket.
Well, that broke the rules. Yeah. Yeah. On Black Friday one year, we put out an ad that said, don't buy this jacket, with a picture of the jacket, and said, don't buy it just because you're bored. But if you really need it, then here's what we'll do for you. We'll make sure that if you get too fat or you get bored with it, we'll find another owner for it. If it breaks down, we'll fix it. And at the end of its life, finally, in fact, we'll buy it back from you. And at the end of its life, send it to us and we'll break it down into its components and recycle the whole thing into more products. Of course, it ended up selling more of those jackets. You can imagine.
Really interesting when you're talking about rewriting the rules and going against the grain. How much of it was like, okay, I know, you were drafted in the Korean War, but in the 60s in California, that hippie rebellious culture that was there at the time, did that feed into that kind of, that kind of mindset when you were with Patagonia?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We thought all businessmen were greaseballs, and, we didn't want to be a business person or anything. And no, it was not only a period of rebellion, but it was a period of really fat economy. You could get a job anytime you felt like. You could buy gasoline for 20 to 25 cents a gallon. You could camp for free. Now you have to pay, $30 a day to camp in these campsites. So it was living off the fat of the land, and you could do that. I would spend a whole summer with practically no money. I mean, one year we went to a store in San Francisco before the summer started, and we bought cases of damaged cat food, cans of cat food that were, the cans are all damaged, at 5 cents a can. And we'd go to the butcher shop and say, "Hey, do you have any bones or fat you want to throw away?" And we lived off of ground squirrels and porcupines and marmots, and living off the fat of the land and doing well, stealing fruit from fruit trees.
You couldn't do that now, sadly. You'd be in prison.
We spent a few days in prison too, but
I read that. So, do you have an official criminal record, or is that too much to answer on it? Oh, you do. He says it with pride. I love it.
In fact, I was at a party down in Argentina recently, and the guy who runs Patagonia Argentina is a real juvenile delinquent. And at the party, he had all his guides there who were all high school friends of his. And I said, "Okay," and they're all really great businessmen. And I said, "Okay, everybody, put your hand up who's been in prison." And practically everybody in the room put their hands up.
That's brilliant.
But look, will we move it on to the salmon?
Yeah, I think so. Let's get into the salmon. I mean, tell us a bit about the time when you actually discovered fly fishing, because obviously that's what we're into, and that's what our audience are particularly into.
Well, I started with, a bamboo pole. We used to call them Calcuttas in those days, and you could buy one at a sporting goods shop. A big long piece of bamboo, and we'd put a string on the end and a worm, and that was it. And then I went from there to a bait casting rod and reel, and then a spinning rod and reel. And I used that to go into the mountains like the Winter Range or the Sierras, and I would eat fish. I'd catch fish and eat fish. And then one day I was in the Teton Mountains in Wyoming, and I watched this old guy he wasn't old then, but he was a mountain guide, Glenn Exum, quite a well-known mountain guide. I didn't know him, but he was teaching his son, Eddie Exum, how to fly cast. And I was just standing looking at this. I've never even heard of fly fishing. And he looked over at me and said, "Hey, come on over here, son." And he also taught me how to cast, just 15-minute lesson or something. And I went out and I bought a spin fly combo rod, just in case I wanted to go back to spinning. So I used that for a while, and then strictly fly fishing from then on. So I've been doing that for 70 years of fly fishing.
So you were literally a teenager when you discovered fly fishing?
Yeah, I was about 17 or something. Mostly fishing in the mountains and stuff. There's not much trout fishing around Southern California. So every summer I'd spend the whole summer up in Wyoming and Canada. climbing, and I always had my fishing rod with me. And then, I finally got into an anadromous fish by fishing for steelhead. And I would go up to British Columbia every year. And for a while there, in fact, Eddie Exum, Glenn Exum's son, and I would rent a little cabin for $50 a week that had no running water or anything, but it was right above the Kispiox River. And so that's where I learned to steelhead fish. And then that went on to, Atlantic salmon, Pacific salmon, and all the anadromous fish.
What role has fly fishing in particular played in your life?
Well, it's an important one now because, at 85, I'm losing my legs. I'm having a really hard time surfing anymore. My balance is shot to hell, so I'm not doing any climbing. So I'm fishing all the time. In fact, I'm leaving tomorrow for New Zealand for 3 weeks. That's what I do. And I have to do something, some kind of a sport or whatever. Otherwise I get pretty funky. And for me, fly fishing there's no end to it. Like we were saying, every time I go out, I learn something. And like, for instance, there's a little spring creek near my house in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. That's a public spring creek. And hardly anyone fishes it because it's so difficult. Even though you can see the fish, they're all 16 to 20 inches. They're in very shallow water. The trouble is they see you, and as soon as they see you, they close their mouths. And they're eating, size 32 something or another. I mean, tiny, tiny little stuff. And
32, wow.
And you can't get a good drift because there's weeds just under the surface that causes, the vortexes and stuff. So you can't get a good drift. And so it's a real challenge. And if you catch a fish there, you're doing good. I've had 5 days in a row where I didn't catch anything, even though the fish are there and they're eating something. But now I'm starting to figure it out. And I approach the stream and I sit down next to the bank and wait for the fish to get used to me. I don't stand up. I cast downstream, 45 degrees downstream, let out line. So I feed the line to the fish so I get a more natural drift. I've been tying size 26 flies, even though before I was scared to do that because I didn't think I could do it. But I've simplified the patterns so that they are simple to tie. And the last time I fished it, I landed 12 fish. Every time I got shut down, I'd hurry home and get on my fly tying desk and tie something else. And I worked at it and worked at it and worked at it. So now I feel like I'm getting it down. It feels pretty good.
You sound like a very much a one-man band when it comes to fly fishing. How well do you take advice and guidance from guides? Because obviously, strictly speaking, they might be the establishment that we rail against so vehemently. Are you somebody that likes to figure this stuff out yourself, or will you pick a guide's brain who's been on that stretch for decades, for the sake of example?
No, I don't fish with guides. Except in New Zealand, I'm with friends who have hired some guides to take us around. But they don't micromanage us. They just take us to streams that we would know about. And then, I just tell them I just want to be left alone. And except I need some help sometimes spotting fish because my eyes aren't that good. But I won't fish from a boat, and I won't fish with a guide. Bone fishing, everybody fishes with a guide. And that drives me crazy. And with a guide screaming at me to cast.
Strip. That's all you ever hear.
I would rather go off. I take a pair of snowshoes with me, and so that I can access really soft marl where normally it'd sink, and normally where a boat is too shallow for a boat to go. So I wear these snowshoes, and I end up catching more fish than the whole camp put together.
So that's the tip for the elusive bonefish. Pack
Snowshoes.
a pair of snowshoes when you're next on the flats in Bahamas.
That's
Who
breaking the
knew?
right?
It's brilliant.
We edit that bit out, because if that gets out there,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, let's not share that. That's gold.
Yeah, you'll be able to buy Orvis snowshoes.
Exactly. Orvis snowshoes for every discerning bone fisherman.
Yvon, tell us, what's some of the favorite places that you fly fished?
I love it down in Patagonia, Argentina and Chile, both. I love New Zealand. I love Italy. Actually, to tell you the truth, the fly fishing in Italy, where I go, is better than anything in Montana.
Wow.
Absolutely. It's you look at these rivers, you think there can't be any fish in there. They're all channelized. They're mining gravel in the river. It's right next to freeways, and you think, but you know what? That water is San Pellegrino water.
Yeah.
It's all this calcium limestone water, so it builds up incredible insect life, and it's full of fish. Every river has rainbows, browns, marble trout, hybrids, grayling. I mean, it's the best. It's absolutely the best fly fishing around.
Whereabouts?
Yes, I was going to say, can you give us the GPS coordinates,
Where?
please?
Yeah.
No, I can't talk about it. And also, you have to have someone with inside knowledge, and you have to be family. It's
Okay.
La Familia. If you're the family,
Yeah.
then you're allowed to go. There's a lot of private water, and so you're allowed to go on some of these waters. In fact, I've got a 10-year license for Alto Adige, which is near impossible to get for a foreigner.
Wow. So it's pretty stitched up.
It is. But I've got a good
Okay.
Italian friend who's one of the best, and he's got it completely wired.
Okay, so Atlantic salmon. Let's get specific about species here. We're obviously all about the Atlantic salmon over here, Dara and I, and the terrible situation that it's currently facing. Tell us a little bit about what got you into the Atlantic salmon. I know we've had Jasper Packanen on, your friend who you've done a lot of Atlantic salmon fishing with. Tell us when you first discovered the joys of Atlantic salmon fishing and that wonderful fish.
My first time I fished for Atlantic salmon with Joe Brown, the English climber. He's one of the greatest climbers ever to come out of England. It was on the Tweed, I believe. He had a beat on the Tweed. This is so long ago, and he had a double-handed rod. He hands me this double-handed thing, and I had no idea what it was. I never heard of a spey rod or anything, and it was green heart, it weighed a ton.
Yep.
I had to learn to cast it. Of course, neither of us caught any fish. And I thought it was the stupidest way to fish I'd ever seen. And then finally I learned spey casting in steelhead rivers. And then I think I first caught the first Atlantic salmon was probably in Iceland, maybe. I used to go to Iceland on my way to Europe to go climbing. And I think I caught my first Atlantic salmon there, probably.
So you've seen then firsthand, if it was that long ago, you have seen that this, as you have, I'm sure, with all species that you fish for, but perhaps specifically the Atlantic salmon in this case, you've seen that incredibly abrupt, violent, steep drop-off in numbers over your lifetime, over your fishing career.
Oh, absolutely. Both in Europe and in Eastern Canada. I've seen, the difference is like night and day. It's incredible. I've seen it all. I mean, I've seen not only the disappearance of salmon, I've seen the disappearance of the insects. When I was young, driving out to Wyoming in June, you'd have to stop your car every once in a while to clean the insects off your roof. Every time you went by a wet area, the mayflies and caddisflies are so thick that you'd have to clean off your windshield. And now they're gone. We've lost 40% of our invertebrates worldwide, and they say 70% of the mayflies are gone. And in some areas, the mayflies are smaller than they're one size smaller than they were 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's real obvious. I've seen all this with my own eyes. The last time I went to Iceland was about 4 years ago, and the fishing was terrible. We fished maybe 4 or 5 rivers, and it was terrible. There were no fish for one reason or another. I mean, they were still netting the mouth of some of these rivers. They were next to salmon farms. The fishing was terrible, where Iceland used to be phenomenal.
Has it put you off fishing for salmon then, Yvon?
No, I go to Labrador. I go to a river in Labrador that is still absolutely, if you're going to do a baseline for a river, this is the baseline. This river is all sight fishing, dry fly fishing with size 12 and 14 dry flies, soft hackles. We treat these fish as if they were big brown trout. So we don't fish it in the normal salmon way. And last year, in 11 days, my Italian friend and I hooked 232 salmon.
Atlantics.
Yeah, up to 28 pounds. Now we didn't land them all because we're using barbless hooks and very small flies, and you're not allowed to land more than, I don't know, 4 a day or something. So
that must have been like going back in time. Surely that must have been how it used to be 200, 300, 400 years pre-industrial revolution, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the way it should be.
Well, that's interesting. So do you still chase the salmon, the Atlantics, or have you, besides that incredible river in Labrador that you've just told us about, do you travel for the Atlantics like you used to, or are you kind of resting them, for want of a better word?
No, I don't.
Right.
And in fact, I haven't steelhead fished in quite a few years because there's so few steelheads now.
Yeah.
They're really crashed. And so I don't want to go up there and bother them.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting that you think as an angler, you think you have a part to play in conserving the few that are left by perhaps not bothering them, perhaps not fishing for them.
Yes.
So would you discourage salmon anglers? Would you say why would you go and fish for those on that river, let's say, when you know that they've been the numbers have been dwindling so dramatically?
Well, if we stop fishing, unfortunately, we're not going to have any advocates for protecting rivers. I can't say that I think many fishermen are advocates, but no one else cares about rivers. Kayakers are more environmental than fishermen are.
Do you think?
Oh, absolutely. In the States, there's the surfers, the kayakers, the climbers are much more environmental than fishermen are.
Why do you think that is?
That's really interesting. Yeah. What you are all those things. You've kayaked. You're a fisherman. Why is that? Because that's kind of mind blowing.
I have no idea. I mean, I read Trout and Salmon magazine, from the UK, and
yeah,
they're so lame as far as pushing environmental stuff, and the organizations for Atlantic salmon are also super lame.
So what can we do? Because that's why we're here, and we consider the raison d'être of this podcast is to absolutely kick things up and create awareness, create a stink, get people motivated, get people active. We'll come on to that towards the end a little more perhaps, but listening to you now talk about the NGOs and the trout and salmons and the media of the salmon world, sounds like you think they're pretty lackluster.
The trouble with the UK is that they embrace hatcheries a lot and catching hatchery fish. And that's one of the big problems of Atlantic salmon is that we're dumbing down the gene pool by sending out millions of hatchery smolts. And it's the same with Pacific salmon. You know, in the Pacific, you've got Korea, Japan, Russia, Canada, the US, all sending out billions of salmon smolts into the Pacific. And there's so many out there now that the wild fish don't have anything to eat. And that's one reason why the wild fish are crashing. And then these hatchery fish mate with the wild fish. And then, you know, in 5 generations, well, first of all, if you get a hatchery fish breeding with a wild fish, their success in having prodigy is 40% of what it would be with 2 wild fish.
Sure.
And in 5 generations of hatchery fish breeding, they forget how to spawn. They lose their ability to spawn. It can happen. In the UK is you got to resist the idea that we can solve these problems with technology and with, you know, hatchery fish.
Like for you, do you think what's one of the other big areas? Fish farms? Is that another one, Yvon? You think
I think
causing an issue?
Yeah, I think fish farms is one of the worst problems. Absolutely. Both escaping fish, and that happens everywhere. I mean, they just had some giant escapements in Iceland.
Sure.
They breed with the wild fish, and eventually, you know, they have fish farms at the mouth of the Alta, the greatest salmon river in the world, and they do everything they can to try to kill those escaped fish, but they get through. They breed with the wild fish, and salmon farms are really evil. I mean, we made every mistake in agriculture, on land agriculture, that we possibly can. We're destroying the planet with industrial farming, and now we're doing the same thing with aquaculture. Exact same thing. And it doesn't have to be that way.
Are you a big advocate for putting these open cage farms on land? Do you think, because we can't, once we've invented the Frankenfish, this supersized creation that is the farm salmon, and we've made it as cheap as chips for a huge swathe of the population to use as their source of protein. I mean, I understand this is part of a bigger issue. Can we take it away from them, or do we make it much more sustainable in the process of its farming, ergo putting it on land and in tanks?
If you corner a tiger and you don't give him a way out, he'll fight to the death, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these fish farms are fighting to the death. And you got to give them an alternative, which is it can be done on land. But I know of only one farm in the world that's on land that is truly anywhere close to sustainable. They all release some kind of pollution, all of them. They all use inordinate amount of water. They, for one reason or another, they're absolutely not sustainable. And there's only one, and that's it. I hate to talk about it because I'm also an investor in it. In Halifax, Nova Scotia, where the 100% of the water is recycled, 100%. The only water that's added is water that's in the fish when you harvest, and also some evaporation. So you add very, very little water from outside. They have wind power and excess wind power, so they also get the water by pulling it out of the air with pumps. So it doesn't even come from the city or anything. There's nothing added. There's no chemicals added. It's the fish feed. This is kind of a long story, but I'm also involved in growing a fish in rice paddies in Argentina. And then we make fish meal from them, and that's part of the fish feed for the salmon farm. And algae, complete protein algae. There's soldier fly larvae. So it's a very natural fish feed, and none of it comes from killing anchovies and sardines and herring in the ocean.
Mhm.
All the fish feed comes from waste. So it's a very sustainable thing. So it can be done.
So just going back to grabbing the tiger by the tail, that perhaps we're looking at these big, bloated international, predominantly Norwegian fish farming industry, and if they're going to go down in flames, but they're going to die trying. Are they, to your knowledge, looking into this? Are they investing into research into more sustainable ways of feeding their fish, of looking after the environment that they rear them in? Or do you think they're just going hell for leather, taking the money while they can?
Well, I think it's both. I think there's some Norwegian fish farms that are they won't change, and they'll fight to the death. They pay off politicians everywhere, and like in Tasmania and Canada, Eastern Canada. But there are some that have given up. Like we kicked the salmon farms out of Maine that were going to be in the estuary at the mouth of the Penobscot River. We kicked them out, and now they're talking to us about getting involved in on-land salmon farms. They can see the writing on the wall. They've kicked them out of British Columbia now.
Sure.
And so they're starting to see it, but nobody is doing it the right way except this one farm. I mean, I hate to talk about that, but it's true.
I always worry about, and I totally agree with you, Yvon, in terms of, this whole obsession with growth and, where, it's finite resources. Like in terms of aquaculture, in terms of the demand for fish and how we can grow it sustainably, will we be able to meet demands of the growing population based on existing technologies or based on what you're saying can be sustainable?
There's just too many of us. But when these net farmers talk about they're feeding the world healthy fish, it's absolute bullshit. It's like 1% of the fish eaten in the world is produced by these salmon farmers. So that's for rich people. It's not for poor people. They're feeding them, herring and anchovies and sardines that we should be eating ourselves. So we're taking a low value fish, mining the oceans for low value fish, and then making a high value fish and feeding that to wealthy people.
Crazy. Absolutely crazy.
Yvon, there was a part in the book you wrote, which kind of struck me, where you say evil is a stronger influence than good. By evil, I mean something morally bad and destructive. Over and over, I've seen so many institutions, governments, religions, corporations, and even sports become more evil when they could easily be doing more good. But believing this keeps me on my toes, keeps me from getting hit from behind, keeps me from becoming a victim. Thinking these dark thoughts doesn't depress me. In fact, I'm a happy person. I'm a Buddhist about it all. I've accepted the fact there's a beginning and an end to everything. Maybe the human species has run its course and it's time for us to go away and leave room for other, one hopes, more intelligent, responsible life forms. You're very much a glass half empty on that basis then, are you?
Well, if you believe that, if you believe in a structured religion where we're put on this earth by God to be a superior human being to all the other animals and stuff like that, then you get depressed, right? But if you think I'm just an animal, just like every other animal, you accept that you're going to live for a while and then you're going to die, and that's the way it is. And not many people will accept the fact that they're going to die. They don't live their lives like they're going to die someday. They're going to live forever. And I think until we get a spiritual connection with nature and with our planet, we're not going to get anywhere. As long as we believe that technology is going to save us, technology is going to help, but it's not going to save us. We have to have that spiritual connection and admit that we are animals. We're extirpating all the large mammals first. We're a large mammal.
Unfortunately, Yvon, and I agree with you, the The difficulty I have with it is over 5,000 years, we have shown no or little inclination to go down that route. Technology, machines, industrialization, it's just become more and more and more. And I can't see us suddenly having a sea change or a brainwash or a lobotomy in the, we are, and I totally agree with the phrase, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. But unfortunately, I don't think the evidence pointing that we're going to change anytime soon.
I mean, in my own life, I try to simplify my life as much as I can. And that's extremely difficult. My hero was the father of a Japanese climbing friend of mine. And the old guy lost his wife. And so he lives by himself up in northern Japan on the coastline. He has a garden. And he goes out fishing on the rocks every day and catches more fish than he can eat. So he trades some fish for rice and for a few other things. He lives on $200 a month. So he's no bother to the planet at all. He's not a consumer. And for me, that's the ideal. And I'm other than taking airplanes to go fishing, which I'm going to be in the seventh level of hell, fueled with jet fuel, that's for sure. But other than that, I'm trying to lead as simple a life as possible. I've always felt that with any sport, you perfect the sport by going towards simplicity, not complexity. If you're a spear fisherman with aqua lungs and stuff, work towards breath holding and spearing fish by holding your breath. In fact, you'll spear more fish because those bubbles from the aqua lungs scare the fish away. But you have to train your body to hold your breath for 3 or 4 minutes.
Yeah.
But that's the direction it should go. And climbing, some of the routes that I did that took 10 days on El Capitan, guys are doing it in 1 day or soloing something. And that's the way it should go. And I think all our lives should go towards simplicity instead of complexity. If you can get by with getting rid of your car and bicycling to the grocery store, that's a big step.
It's very Thoreau-esque, isn't it? Going to the woods, wishing to live deliberately.
It's fly fishing. It's the elegance of simplicity. And I can see exactly why, Yvon, fly fishing means so much to you, because it is exactly that. The simpler that you get, the more elegant, the better that fly is presented, the more likely it is you catch a fish. It's as simple as that.
Well, it can be, but you can also fall under the trap of, I didn't catch a fish today because I had a Western dry fly line instead of an Eastern dry fly line.
Right.
Or I had the wrong fly. Or the fly fishing industry is no different than the women's cosmetics. It makes you feel insecure if you don't have that $100 bottle of face cream. That's what this book, Pheasant Tail, is about, is that with 17 flies, I could spend the rest of my life with a pheasant tail and partridge flymph, which is a soft hackle tied on a heavier hook. I could spend the rest of my life just with that one fly, and I would catch as many fish as I want.
Did I read somewhere, Yvon, that one season you went a whole season with just one fly?
That was the fly. I caught Atlantic salmon. I caught steelhead. I caught bonefish. Caught every trout. I caught surf perch, all with one fly. And in fact, there was an old guy in the UK, I can't remember his name now, who was one of the greatest salmon fishermen of all time. And that was in the days when you'd catch, 1,000 fish a year. And he spent an entire year with one fly. He spent 2 years, 1 year just with one fly, and then the next year with another fly. He caught as many fish as he always caught.
It's the simplicity of trying to make it, as you say, and I want to read this book, Yvon, I really do, trying to narrow it down to as little choice as possible. There lies the elegance of the simplicity. It certainly does for me. Yvon, do you mind? We're going to move on to activism now. The rise of activism in recent years, it's a kind of a good thing. It's no longer seen as a stigmatized activity. It's not seen in negative terms. Why do you think that is? I mean, I know Patagonia obviously are incredibly, your legacy there as well has been encouraging activism and investing in activism and trying to get people mobile in that sense. Why do you think, finally, it seems at least, things are moving in the right direction when it comes to activism?
I think it's because of the young people. You know, it's they're the only ones. Our only hope is with the young people. They're different than we are, and they can see that we're destroying this planet, and they want to do something about it. I mean, every young kid I know is going to college studying environmental studies. Everyone, it's unbelievable. And I think that's what's happening.
I have a 14-year-old daughter. This is why it's particularly interesting to hear you say that, and she's certainly very beginning to become pretty ensconced in the whole activism thing, and she's very interested in the river, the pollution issues that are going on in the UK at the moment in the rivers and the private water companies and the plight of the salmon through me. They really are, even though the school aren't necessarily making it part of the agenda or part of the curriculum. It seems you're right. The young people, maybe through social media, maybe through what they see on the television and the news, but they really feel this almost visceral, natural responsibility, moral responsibility to undo the issues that they're going to be faced with and thrown at over the next 50 years.
No, I agree. Yeah, the schools are finally catching up. I mean, about 10 years ago, I was at Yale University and I was asked to give some talks there. I gave a talk at the School for Environmental Studies, the School of Forestry, and then the School of Religious Studies. I gave a talk. I gave a talk at the business school. And get this, I got a high school education, right? They offered me a teaching fellowship at Yale because the School of Environmental Studies is not teaching any business courses. And yet those people a lot of those are going to go work for NGOs somewhere, environmental NGOs with no business background. And then the business schools are not teaching any environmental responsibility. And they see that my company is doing all of that. And but I'll tell you a funny story. After I went to all of these schools, they put me in a room with all the deans of the schools, and they said, well, now that you've been at Yale for 3 days and seen everything, what can we do to make Yale a better school? I said, lower the height of the urinals. They're too high.
And I bet there's people furiously going, that's metaphorical, that's deep. What does he mean by that? What does he mean by that? There's a Zen-like message there. Let the short people rule the world. Yeah, he's right.
Well, in terms of lessons and advice, Jim has obviously set up Activist Anglers. And do you have any advice for people, for a group like Jim's, like in terms of having more impact? You know, you have a lifetime of activism, Yvon. What advice would you impart?
Well, I think you have to be bold. You can't be polite. I mean, let me give you an example. During the last presidential race, we came out with a stand-up short that was made from regeneratively grown cotton in India, where farmers are not just organic, but they're growing regeneratively. And so this is the first product that we came out with. And my daughter, without telling anybody, put a label on the back of the short that said, vote the assholes out. And she didn't say anything. And some guy in Denmark found out about that, and it went viral. It went all over the world. It was in the front page of
Brilliant.
every Italian newspaper. In fact, a friend of mine in Italy said that he heard a journalist say that's going to take 2 points off of Trump's ratings. So you have to be bold because the enemy is bold, and don't hold back. You got to really attack the politicians that are doing the wrong thing.
I tell you what, Yvon, we're just moving into the last few questions that we ask our guests. And we did want to ask you this one, and it kind of ties in with the conversation we've just had the last few minutes. If you were president of the United States and you could enact 3 laws that were guaranteed to pass Congress and not be struck down by the Supreme Court, what would those laws be, or what area would you focus on?
Well, first of all, I can't be president because I'm too short. No short candidate ever wins. It's always the tallest one. So, plus my campaign would be pot in every chicken. That won't work. So, the first thing I would do as president, I would turn the company around to focus on quality so that we know we got to get rid of fossil fuels. Where do we start? Right now, we're treating all fossil fuels as equal. Well, petroleum from the tar sands in Alberta is not equal to maybe some oil from Saudi Arabia or something. And oil in the Amazon that's polluting the Amazon, or in Nigerian swamps. So I would start carbon taxes on the worst quality energy. And I think that would change everything. And in fact, maybe it would lead to, okay, so import taxes. Have higher import taxes on steel from a mill that is a polluter, as opposed to one that's not so bad. It seems like crazy thinking, but after World War II, Japan was on the rocks, as you know, and they started making the worst junk you can imagine, just like China does now. Everything from Japan was just the worst quality. It's just horrible. And there's this guy from the US called Edward Deming, who was a professor who gave up on America. And he went to Japan after World War II. And he taught courses and he wrote books about convincing the Japanese to focus on quality in everything that they make. And he turned the entire country around. Now, everything you buy from Japan is of the highest quality. Right?
Yeah.
And he did it, one person. And that leads to consuming less, consuming better. You know, they say poor people can't afford cheap goods. Well, you know, instead of owning a bunch of stainless steel knives that are horrible steel and you can't even cut a tomato with them, why not buy one really good carbon steel knife?
Yeah.
It costs less and you can sharpen it.
Yep.
This is a lesson I've learned in my life of making, you know, high quality climbing gear and trying to make the best quality clothing because it's the most responsible thing I can do. So we got to get away from the consumer society, just own fewer things, but better things. And that you could change the government. You could stop subsidizing, corn for ethanol fuel, for God's sakes, subsidizing the worst parts of the agricultural industry. And you don't have to subsidize the regenerative organic ones, just leave them alone, but get rid of the subsidies for the ones that are doing the wrong thing. And anyway,
that's great.
Never happened, but let's try.
Well, it's really interesting because, like, what you're saying, Yvon, as well as, like, never mind whether you're president or laws enacting, it's the mindset. It's the shift in mindset that we need to move away from that throwaway consumerist culture that, especially online, that's the danger, isn't it? That it's so easy to just buy any crap that you want, you know, just with a click of a button and away it go. Whereas, you know, like you said, live with less, but it'll stand you in good stead, and you'll be doing your bit for the planet at the same time.
Well, yeah, if we're using the resources of 5 or 10 planets, I don't know what it is now, but
Yeah.
guess what? We're going to run out of resources. Water is going to be first. That's going really fast. Topsoil is going to be second. We're using up all the topsoil, and it takes 1,000 years to grow an inch of topsoil. We're on a suicide course.
Kamikaze.
Yeah.
So tell me briefly, Yvon, what do you want your legacy? I mean, listen, you've done so much, you've accomplished so much. You're an incredibly experienced, wise man. I know you will say, you'll say there's so much more to do, and of course, that is the case. But what do you want your legacy to be? What would your legacy be? I know Patagonia is enough legacy for an entire nation, let alone one single individual. But what do you want your legacy to be?
I've been asked that before, and I haven't been able to come up with an answer.
Really?
I haven't thought about it, and I don't want to think about it. It's too egocentric to even think about it, I think. The tombstone ought to say he lived a simple life. That would be ideal. Instead of saying he was a billionaire, Forbes magazine called me a billionaire when that was absolute bullshit. That made me so angry I gave the company away.
Good man. So would you say, if we're gonna get the semantics of it, would you say he led a simple life or he achieved a simple life? Because there's a subtle difference there, isn't there?
Well, you never achieve it, and you never lead it, because it's a process.
Yeah.
But it's a really good direction to go to.
Sure, it's a good mantra.
Whether it's fishing and having one dry fly line that you can use for pike, and you can use for trout, and you can use for salmon, and or one fly. It's the direction to go to. I really believe that.
While we're on the subject of presidents, we ask everybody, all of our guests who might sadly be affected by this, if Donald Trump, God forbid, gets into we don't want to get too polemic on this, but if Donald Trump gets a second term, is that it? Are you out of there by hook or by crook? Are you handing in your passport and are you off? Off to New Zealand,
Off to New
perhaps,
Zealand,
yeah.
Yvon.
Well, my daughter just came back. She says she's out of here if he gets back in.
Oh, she said that for real?
Yeah, and it's very difficult to be a resident in New Zealand, but now we have a store. We opened our store in Queenstown.
Right.
So we have a Patagonia store. Because of that, we could get a residency.
Brilliant.
And the smart people, when Hitler was in power, they got out of there.
Yep.
The ones that didn't suffered.
Yep.
Either they were killed or they had this horrible guilt for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
Without going too much down the obviously the political route, Yvon, but and obviously we're not living there. Is it comparable to that feeling?
That
do you think?
foreboding.
1930s Germany, that kind of foreboding. That's the word.
It's a few years ago, and they did a profile of me in a New Yorker magazine, and I'm quoted as saying, this is before Trump was elected, and I said, it's probably the end of the American empire. It can no longer be governed. Like, I have nothing in common with some of these rednecks down in Mississippi or Alabama, and they have nothing in common with me. We should be two separate countries, really. And to try to hold it together, it's like holding the Soviet Union together. You're trying to get diverse cultures like Latvia and Estonia and the Balkans, and you can't hold it together. And the average age of an empire is about 250 years, and there's no exceptions. They all collapse, and we're there.
Yeah.
And the perfect person to take the empire down is Donald Trump.
Yeah. He is, though. He's put the target firmly on America's back, hasn't he?
I don't make a very good martyr. That's why I think I would flee rather than try to fight.
Yvon, you mentioned obviously the billions earlier. And this is a question for, I suppose maybe even the younger generation. If you had no money, what would you advise people to do to help with the plight of the Atlantic salmon?
Well, get a job, first of all. But
pay your taxes and then you can think.
I would volunteer for one of these groups that is doing some good. There's a lot of young people that do that. If you're rich, you dig into your pocket and give money to people that are doing the right thing. If you've got the balls, then get up in the front lines there and protest. I don't have the courage to be on the front lines and get thrown in jail and stuff, but I do have the money to give to those people that have the courage to do that.
Sure.
Certainly, first thing you got to do is educate yourself as to what is really going on. And once you see how dire the situation is, I mean, it is so dire. We are, as a species, we are absolutely threatened. And some of us will make it through it someday, but there's going to be massive die-offs of people, whether through diseases, wars, whatever. So educate yourself as to how dire things are, and then that'll maybe get you motivated. But if you have your head in the sand and you just say, well, it's all going to turn out anyway, technology will save us, or let other people do the work, then you're going to lose your soul in doing that.
It's a paradigm shift, isn't it? That's what's required. As you were saying earlier, Dara, we all need to change the way we think. It's not about changing policies. That all that stuff will come. It's about changing the way we think as an animal and what survival means to us. And only then can we affect the change that is so desperately needed. It's as complicatedly simple as that. It has to come from here, and it has to be a whole new way of looking at things.
That's right.
Final question. Well, we'll bring it up a little bit at the end. It's your last day on Earth. That sounds bleak, but go with me. It's hypothetical. It's your last day on Earth. Where would you fish, and who would you fish with?
Probably Penelope Cruz. In a very secluded place.
That's the best.
I don't know what Javier Bardem would say about that. We could ask him. Where would you fish? Which river would you go to?
Maybe the Alta.
For the salmon, Atlantic salmon. Interesting.
If you had your choice, Yvon, like a last day in terms of fishing, would it be salmon fishing, or or would it be dry
water,
fly,
whatever, yeah.
or?
I would say it'd probably a spring creek. There's a couple spring creeks in Patagonia that I fish that are, I think, the best in the world. And I would say it would be a spring creek.
Okay.
Just because of the complexity of it, the challenge of it. But spring creek fishing, I think, is the ultimate in fly fishing.
If Penelope Cruz ends up on the missing persons list and is seen somewhere in South America on a little spring creek or something, then we know it's time to worry. The end is nigh.
That's right. Get ready to kiss your ass goodbye.
Get ready. It's over.
To get back to what everybody should be doing, I think you're doing exactly what you should be doing. Having these podcasts talking about the fate of salmon. There you go.
Brilliant.
Everybody has to look down inside themselves and see what their resources are, what they're good at. If you're a photographer, you have a responsibility to go out and photograph the evils of the world or whatever. And so I think a good example is having a podcast that does good.
That gives us encouragement. Thank you. That's really kind of you. Genuinely, that's fabulous.
Well, I love these fish. I absolutely love them. Even the little trout. I mean, I'm not a big game fisherman at all. I'm a small game hunter, and they're such magnificent creatures. I don't want to see them go.
Coming up in the next episode of The Last Salmon,
we're talking to a man who is a photographer, he's a journalist, he's an international fly angler. All the photos that you've seen, all the pretty pictures that you've seen of those wonderful fish, whether they be in Chile or Russia or Australia or Africa or in the Middle East, anywhere. This guy has been there, he's caught that fish, he's taken that photo. He is, of course, Matt Harris.
And the story about the Yakanga, which is one of my absolute favourite rivers, is about a fish I lost. Story about the ricer at the end is about the fish I lost. And it is that, but also I think increasingly, the fact that they are so iconic, but they're also under so much pressure and in so much danger makes you love them even more.
Listen and follow on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to give us your feedback, rate, and review. We want to open up the salmon discussion to you.
And remember to keep in the fight for our salmon.